Okay, so we're going to wrap up this chapter by talking about pornography. And so, how do we define it? What is pornography? Well, the moral standard says that the community will set up the standards that will determine what is pornographic and what is not. Oftentimes, they call these obscenity laws. So, if it's obscene, it's pornography. If it has any kind of educational purpose, it would not be obscenity necessarily. Interestingly, the videos that I have been posting on YouTube, thinking that, maybe other people around the world who are, in quarantine and stuff might be looking for good, solid information, might watch my videos. I posted my videos on YouTube, and out of all the videos that I've posted, the only one that has gotten flagged for being inappropriate for people under the age of 18 is my discussion of female sexual anatomy. Nothing else has been flagged. And I'm not fighting it because I don't really care. I'm not making money off of YouTube or anything. But I know that it does not meet the standard of pornography if you use the moral standard, because everything that's in the video is for educational purposes. Like, nothing is there for prurient interest. Nothing is there to get a person aroused. So it's kind of questionable. I thought about saying something to YouTube about it, but I don't think there's any hope to say anything anyway. But it's not obscenity in the sense of, being designed to arouse a person's prurient interests. It is for educational purposes. But it's a good example of how this moral standard is difficult to apply. Like, which community's standards do we apply when we're talking about a piece of work, whatever it might be? Especially something that might be created and then, let's say, disseminated on the internet or disseminated via the mail or something like that. Which community's standards would that material need to conform to? So, the moral standard's a difficult one, but you might notice it being in play if you travel. When I was living on the west side of Washington, the local station played a country song where he's got his toes in the water, his ass in the sand. But when I came to the east side of Washington, that same song was, I got my toes in the water, in the sand. They literally just took out the word ass because it's viewed as obscenity. So in one community, the standard may differ substantially from another community. And you can see that in billboards, or you can see that in advertisements that might be on TV. If you were to compare European standards to American standards, you're going to notice that there's a lot more acceptance of nudity and things in Europe than there is in the US. And so these kinds of community standards are based on what the people who are around here and might be exposed to it would expect, right? But it's difficult to apply. Now, here's a good question. Is the Kama Sutra obscenity, or is it educational purposes? The Kama Sutra, we mostly know it as a book with sexual positions in it, but it also talks about some principles of relationships and other things. So is it educational, or is it to titillate? Is it obscenity? It's in the eye of the community's standard, isn't it? So what about the discrimination standard? Maybe this will be a more objective definition of pornography. In the discrimination standard, it would be considered pornography if it causes sexual discrimination, harassment, rape, or domestic abuse. So if this material or whatever we're talking about leads to one of these outcomes, or could be blamed for one of these outcomes, then we could say that that material is pornographic. So again, I'm going to go with, that's not as objective as we might want it to be, because it's really difficult to say that a piece of material led to one of these outcomes. I think I'll just wrap up the definition of pornography by quoting one of the Supreme Court justices who had to sort of define what it was. He said, "I know it when I see it." So, Okay, so since I don't know for sure how we can define pornography, maybe we can try and distinguish pornography from erotica. So here we are on that statue that I keep showing you throughout the quarter, another angle, which is kind of a joke because look at the guy who's upside down. That's a different angle. Okay, so pornography or erotica. Google Dictionary. Oh, you can't go wrong with a Google Dictionary definition, can you? So pornography, printed or visual material containing the explicit description or display of sexual organs or activity intended to stimulate erotic rather than aesthetic or emotional feelings. So, are the people in this center part of this picture meeting the criteria? We've got explicit display of sexual organs and activity. Is it intended to stimulate erotic rather than aesthetic or emotional feelings? I don't know who carved this. I don't know what that person was intending. I don't know. Erotica is defined as literature or art intended to arouse sexual desire. Is this temple intended to arouse sexual desire? Again, I don't know who made it. I don't know what their intention was. Does it arouse sexual desire? Maybe. Does it follow the pornographic definition, stimulate erotic feelings rather than aesthetic or emotional? Maybe. This is tricky, isn't it? I don't know what is objectively pornography and what is objectively erotica. Let's talk about some of the effects. I found this cartoon. Porn movies and Disney are responsible for the most frustrated human beings I know. She says, "Where the hell is my Prince Charming?" And he says, "Where the hell is my insatiable whore?" I'll just leave that for you guys to digest. All right, here's the results of a study where they actually had women choose or be assigned something erotic to watch. So in the dark black bars, it's called high choice erotica because there were lots of different options and the woman picked one and watched it. In the moderate choice, there were fewer choices, but there were choices to be made. In the no choice, there was just the one thing and they had to watch it. And then neutral is when they watched something that was not an erotic video. It was a nature video. So on the far left, we see the measures of psychological arousal. And this is changed score from baseline until after they watched the video, right? So we've got psychological arousal. And so that's their self-report of how aroused they felt. I'm happy to report that watching the nature video was negatively psychologically arousing. And all of the erotic materials did lead to reports of psychological arousal, feeling aroused. The next group of bars is the physiological arousal measure, which was detected using a vaginal plasmidograph. So they inserted the vaginal plasmidograph and it detected vaginal lubrication and vasocongestion and like that. And what we see is the most physiological arousal occurred in the high choice erotica. And then the moderate and the no choice erotica produced equal amounts of physiological arousal. And then the nature movie produced a reduction in physiological arousal. Disgust. You'll notice that the women who had the highest choice expressed the most disgust. And then the moderate and the no choice reported very little, and the same amount of disgust. And then we've got the disgust being very low and a little bit below baseline for the nature video. Guilt and embarrassment, much higher for the women who picked from the high choice erotica. In the moderate and the no choice, they really are not expressing any kind of guilt or embarrassment, and weirdly, much more negative guilt and embarrassment on the nature film. So apparently not feeling guilty or embarrassed about that at all. And then everybody reported lower levels of anxiety after watching a video. All right, so that's what all this graph is depicting, is all these different things, and it's really interesting that everybody got aroused, and for physiological arousal, having choice really seemed to boost the arousability of women physiologically when watching erotica. So having a choice seems to have played a role in being more aroused by it physically, but also feeling more disgusted and more guilty and embarrassed about it. So selecting their own porn increases feelings of disgust and feelings of guilt or embarrassment. So there's definitely, a double-edged sword. Like, women find it arousing, but they also feel shame or disgusting about it, right? So that's one of the effects, is like what it does when women watch it. How about when men watch pornography? And so we've got heterosexual men watching male-female sexual activity and female-female sexual activity. Both of those lead to heterosexual men becoming aroused, as measured by penile strain gauges. So heterosexual men become aroused in either of these kinds of situations, male-female interactions and then female-female interactions depicted in pornography. For heterosexual women, it's kind of interesting that it doesn't really matter who's engaging in sexual activity. It's arousing for heterosexual women. It could be male-female, it could be female-female, it could be male-male. It's arousing for heterosexual women. So kind of a different response by heterosexual men versus heterosexual women, depending on who's engaging in the activity in a pornographic video or an erotic video. What about that discrimination criterion definition of pornography? What is the association between pornography and then discrimination against women? One thing that we know is that pornography increases the demand for trafficked women and children. And, there's a giant industry surrounding pornography in the U.S. And not all of the players in the pornographic or erotic videos are there of their own free will. And so it's something else to remember, that it's possible that the people that are depicted are there against their will. And they might be underage. They aren't supposed to be, and so the video will tell you that they're not, but they might be. Now, what about what's depicted in the actual videos? So, some videos include violence against women in the pornography. And so here we have the perpetrator being male 70.3% of the time, and 29.4% of the time the perpetrator is female. And the victim in all these is 94.4% of the time going to be female. 5.2% the target's going to be male. So we see a lot of violence against mostly women when there is violence depicted in pornography. Not all pornography includes violence. When it's present, it's almost always a female victim that is the target, and it's more commonly a male perpetrator exacting that towards the female target. Now, here's where the pornography gets really harmful, is that 95.1% of the time, the target's response to the aggression is to express pleasure or to act neutral about it, like it didn't bother them at all. So it gives the viewer the impression that females can be aggressed against, and they will either like it or it won't bother them. So that message can lead to some really incorrect interpretations by the viewer, right? So Bridges in 2006, and then Yang and Ga-Yoon in 2012, both studied the question of what men are more likely to do after watching pornography than they are when they haven't been watching pornography. So after watching pornography, men are more likely to report decreased empathy for rape victims. So it actually makes them a little bit more callous towards rape victims after watching pornography. They're more likely to engage in increased aggressive behavior. And this is usually measured in the lab by seeing whether they will turn up white noise really loud in what they think is an opponent's earphones. In truth, there's nobody else really over there, but they think they're working against an opponent. And after watching pornography, they will behave more aggressively. They'll blast their opponent with loud noise, as opposed to when they haven't watched pornography. They're more likely to report that a scantily clad woman deserves to be raped. So after watching pornography, they again express more callous attitudes towards women. They report anger at women who flirt but then refuse to have sex. They report decreased sexual interest in their girlfriends or their wives. And they report increased coercion of partners into unwanted sex acts. So a lot of sort of just increased callousness towards even women that they actually know, not just sort of faceless women in general, but like literally their girlfriend or their wife. They just tend to report, more callous kinds of attitudes in general. Our last subject in pornography is regarding child pornography. And I just saw a news report where they broke up a child pornography ring that was housed in Australia, but a lot of the material was being sent to the US. Child pornography is not something that is typically ignored in the US. People who are in jail for other reasons, murder and assault and other things, they absolutely do not like their fellow inmates who have abused children. And so they don't usually survive very well in the prison system if they've been sent there for child pornography or child abuse. So we've seen this increase in the prosecutions of child pornography as the internet has made it more possible to have more access to child pornography. Sometimes people, I don't think all the way through what child pornography does, because you have, on the one hand, people who are using it for their pleasure, and pedophiles will use it and things like that. But to get the images that are present, you have underage children who have engaged in acts that they cannot consent to. There's no such thing as a child who's in child pornography voluntarily. So there's always that abused child on the other side of it. And so that's why it's taken so seriously, because it helps to limit the victimization of children if we can get rid of this industry. Unfortunately, it's something that flourishes really well on the dark web. People know where to find the back alleys of where to get these things. It's shocking how many people who don't own their own computer, they're using their work computer for some reason, will download this kind of content onto their computer. And that's how we find out about, how common it really is when people's work computers have it. Also IP address or trace and all sorts of things to help us track down people who are buying and selling child pornography. So hopefully on that unfortunately downer, unfortunately the last chapter of our book is a bit of a downer, but hopefully over the course of this quarter, you've gained some insights and knowledge into the general principles having to do with human sexuality in general, and have firmed up your own attitudes about a lot of things. And we'll take that into your future and apply it. So thank you guys for attending class or listening to my videos.